Luka Doncic might actually be superhuman. He might be. I said on a podcast, I said in almost every conversation that the last team that the Mavericks wanted to face in the first round of the NBA playoffs was the Los Angeles Clippers. Because nobody is equipped to guard Luka Doncic like the way the Clippers are equipped to guard Luka Doncic. It hasn't mattered at all. Welcome to the JMULL Show. 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports. Thank you so much for joining us on a Monday. Hopefully you're having a really solid start to the week. It was a busy weekend in sports. We had racing, we had golf, we had basketball, we had a lot of stuff, and we'll get to all of it. We'll get to all of it. It felt like just a normal busy sports weekend. It's a weird concoction of stuff because you never have the FedEx Cup playoffs and basketball happening at the same time. You never have the FedEx Cup and the NBA playoffs happening at the same time. You never have the FedEx Cup and the Indy 500 happening at the same time. You never have the FedEx Cup, the Indy 500, and the Champions League final all happening on the same day. But that's what you had on Sunday. And we'll get to all of it throughout the rest of the show. But where I want to start is with what I just started the show with. And, as an extension, the rest of the NBA playoffs. But in particular, Luka Doncic and his, I think everyone, it's become clear that he's going to be a star. It had become clear this season. We were talking about 28, 7, and 8 or whatever he's averaging this season. He was great last season. You knew it was going to happen eventually, that he would officially arrive as, in my opinion, he's been a top 5 player in the NBA for a while now, but he would have a time when he officially arrived as one of the best players in the NBA. And this series has been it. 100%. Last night, 43 points, 17 rebounds, 13 assists on 18 of 31 shooting. He had 7 turnovers, but when you have the ball as much, it's still close to a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, which is certainly not bad, especially when you're playing Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, and you've got the ball in your hands as much. He played 46 minutes. He was the only player in the Mavericks starting lineup to play more than 40 minutes. This was an overtime game. Nobody else on the team played more than 37. Listen, they won this game without Kristaps Porzingis. He was out with right knee soreness, so he didn't play in this game. And here's what. It's clear that Luka has the gene. Whatever the gene is that makes you perform at a really high level in the playoffs. Whatever it is, Luka's got it. There's no doubt about it. Because there was one way that the Mavericks were going to be competitive in this series. Luka Doncic had to be the best player on the floor. And through 4 games, except for last game 3 when he had a hurt ankle, and he still does. He's still, obviously not 100%. He's been the best player on the floor. In the playoffs, we're talking 42 points, 7 rebounds, 9 assists in game 1. You have the 11 turnovers, yes. 28 points, 7 rebounds, 8 assists. Other way around. 8 rebounds, 7 assists in game 2. He's hurt in game 3. He only plays 29 minutes, but he had 13, 10, and 10. Had a triple-double. And then 43, 17, and 13 on a night. And this is what I think is one of the most important parts of this. On a night when he had to be absolutely spectacular to have a chance to win this game. Because you don't have Kristaps. You got really nice production from the Michigan brothers and Trey Burke and Tim Hardaway Jr. The two combined for 46 points. They were a combined, 18 of 32 from the field. Knocked down 7 threes between the two of them. They were great too. But it all starts with Luka and what he's doing with the ball in his hands, facilitating the way that he is. The Mavericks had 20 assists in this game. He was responsible for 13 of them. Without Kristaps. And they win this game. Now, there are other things about this, like we can say that, well, Paul George didn't play well, but Paul George hasn't played well all series. So at what point do we start looking at this as like, okay, Paul George needs to play better? You know what I'm saying? Like, at what point do we look at it as that rather than, well, you didn't get the full form of the Clippers? Not really, because Paul George didn't play well. Well, what if Paul George never plays well? It's unlikely. But he hasn't had more than 14 points in a game since game 1. 14 points, 11 points, 9 points. Something's bothering him from the Mavericks defense, which is entertaining because the Mavericks don't have a great defense. But when you're playing an offense as good as the Mavericks, there's only so much that defense can do. And here's the secret here. Don't tell anybody. But the Clippers' defense is amateur wasn't the right word. Is average at best. Without Patrick, because apart from their perimeter defenders and Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, give me somebody else that you feel really great about their defensive ability. I mean, Harrell's pretty good, but he's undersized. Reggie Jackson, Lou Williams, Jeff Green, Landry Shamet, Zubac. A frankly washed up Marcus Morris. The Clippers haven't played great defense in this series, which doesn't help when you're playing with an offense as gifted as the Mavericks offense is. But when you look at it, like when you really look at it, the top of the Clippers defense is elite. But especially without Patrick Beverley, they get vulnerable quickly. It's why Trey Burke and Tim Hardaway Jr. are able to have 46 combined. It's why you're getting 15 points on 6 of 9 shooting from Seth Curry. You have to have that balance, which is why the makeup of Beverly, Kawhi, PG, Lou Williams, and Montrezl Harrell, when healthy, is so terrifying in the playoffs. Because you have, of course, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are also elite scorers. Lou Williams is an elite scorer in his own right. Patrick Beverley is going to set the tone alongside Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. And you've got a perfect balance and guys that can take over games. I mean, Lou Williams had 35 points on 13 of 20 shooting in this one. 36, excuse me. He was phenomenal. Kawhi had 32. But when you don't have that guy at the guard position that can... I mean, Patrick Beverley would never let Trey Burke shoot 10 of 14 from the floor. Never. But Landry Shamet, Lou Williams, Reggie Jackson, the guys who got the majority of the minutes at the guard positions, I'm not exactly scared of any of those guys on the defensive end, which I think is, we talk about, Pat Bev really being a tone setter, a guy who's not going to get pushed around, and it's absolutely true. But I think that, the more I look at this, the more I'm not overly impressed by the Clippers defense. And it's because apart from that elite perimeter defense, they don't look all that spectacular elsewhere. And clearly, Luka's not all that off put about the defense that's being put on him, clearly. So when you're elite perimeter guys aren't being able to shut down Luka. Now, Luka's phenomenal. This isn't really about... I'm not really taking shots at PG and Kawhi's defense, even though their defense was really good for stretches last night, and it was better than it had been, for sure. When they're not able to shut down Luka, and then you have the rest of this really dominant, really gifted, really scary Mavericks offense, it becomes a lot harder to win basketball games. I mean, you scored 133 points last night and you didn't win. You knocked down 14 three-pointers. You didn't win. You went 29 to 32 from the free throw line. You didn't win. This series is officially a toss-up. Officially a toss-up. Because, listen, as gifted as Kawhi and PG are, they're not massive high-volume scores. Like, you might every once in a while get, and especially when, like, 32, roughly, for Kawhi is about the normal limit. Like, Kawhi doesn't do that thing a whole lot when he just absolutely explodes for 42. You're going to get somewhere between 30 and 34 from Kawhi most nights. You got 36 in game 3, and 35 in game 2. 36 in game 3, 35 in game 2. That's about the peak. The point being is that they're not going to combine for 80. And then when Paul George isn't playing well and you're playing a Mavericks team that's as good as they are offensively, you got some pressure put on you because they're not going to stop scoring. They're never going to stop scoring. So as a result, you have a series that is very much up in the air. Dallas scored 135 last night without Kristaps. Luka carried a fine starting lineup, but not a phenomenal starting lineup. I mean, Trey Burke, Tim Hardaway Jr., yes, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Maxi Kleber all have been starters in the NBA. But we're talking about Trey Burke, who, like, spent time, like, struggling to find work, consistent work in the NBA. We'll look it up real quick, but Trey Burke has turned himself into a piece for the Mavericks and a contributing piece. I mean, listen, he's played in 33 games this season and hasn't played in more than 58 since 2015-16 with Utah. No offense to Trey Burke. Very good basketball player, elite college player. But it's been a while since he's been an important piece on a good basketball team. Playing 23 minutes a night. He's played in 8 games for Philly this year. Not Philly, excuse me. He was in Philly prior in this season, but 8 games for Dallas. And he's turned into a scorer. And when he turns into a scorer, that's a part of this Mavericks offense that you don't think of. You think Kristaps, you think Luka, you think Seth Curry coming off the bench, you think Tim Hardaway Jr., and now you got to think Trey Burke too. They got a lot of scoring all over the floor, and if the Clippers don't play better defense, this series will continue to be very interesting. It's tied 2-2. Now it's a 3-game series. And 3-game series are fluky. Now, I'm not saying that if the Mavericks win 2 of the next 3 that it was a fluke, because clearly it wasn't. You don't win 7-game series on flukes. That's the point of 7-game series. But Paul George has got to be better. Way better. 45 minutes, 9 points, 3 of 14 from the floor. This Clippers team all of a sudden gets a lot less scary when he's playing like that. But we'll see. That's a very real series, and the winner of that series is very much up in the air. And I never thought that was going to be the case. And I certainly never thought that if you took Kristaps off the floor and it was clear who the ball was going to every time down the floor for the Mavericks, that they would still win a game in that situation. And that's what they did last night. In terms of duels, though, the best duel last night, you had two 50-point games in the Denver-Utah series. First of all, Michael Porter Jr. is so bad on defense that he's been basically taken out of the starting lineup because he's so bad on that end of the floor. He played 23 minutes. He was 4 of 8 from the field, had 9 points. But he's 6'10", bro, 218. How you're not a good defender in that situation is beyond me. Beyond me. I don't understand it at all. At 6'10", 218, you should be able to guard 5 positions. 4. We'll give you not being able to stay in the front of the guard, I guess. But at 6'10", 218, you probably should be able to do that too. He's just so lost. Everything that is wrong with Denver's defense, at least every communication issue, involves him in some way. And as a result, he's not going to be able to play enough in this series. He played 31 and 33 minutes in game 1. But he's just so bad on the defensive end that it doesn't matter. He dropped down to 15 and 23. They had to make a change to make their defense better. It didn't really work. The Jazz scored the most points they've scored in a series in this one. So it didn't exactly change anything. But that's so disappointing. Because this team has a chance to be really interesting next year. But it will start with their defense getting better. And it is only really interesting if Michael Porter Jr. is a really big part of it. And the only way Michael Porter Jr. is a really big part of it is if Michael Porter Jr. is a better defender. With that being said, Jamal Murray, 50 points, 11 rebounds, 7 assists, went toe-to-toe with Donovan Mitchell at 51, 7, and 4. That was a blast to watch. Jamal Murray's 9 of 15 from the three-point line. And what Jamal needs to work on is not, because clearly he can take over a game. What he needs to work on, though, see, in these 4 games he's bookend great games. Game 1, 36. Game 4, 50. Games 2 and 3, 14 points on 6 of 13 shooting, 12 points on 5 of 16. That's where Jamal Murray needs to get to a point where his bad games for this Nuggets team, his bad games are 22 points, at least in the playoffs, because that's what makes the greats so good. And he also needs to find ways to impact the game more. He played 30 minutes in game 2. He only had 4 assists. Like, what makes LeBron so good is, in game 1 or game 2, he only had 16 points, but he also had 17 assists and 13 rebounds or whatever it was. LeBron's really good at impacting games even when he isn't finding a way to shoot it well. Whether that's getting to the line, whether that's facilitating, whether that's playing great defense. I mean, in game 1 against the Clippers, a game that they won, LeBron wasn't great, but he was elite defensively in the last quarter of that game, and it resulted in them scratching out a win. Jamal needs to be better at that when the shots aren't going down like they were against Utah yesterday. But one thing is clear, that the dude can light up the scoreboard in the playoffs. Now, we'll see if he can do it against a better defensive team. But scoring 50 points in a playoff game against anybody is impressive, regardless of what their defense is, what they're known for as a team, whatever the case is. It's very impressive regardless. But with that being said, I mean, I don't see a world in which Utah loses that series, because that defense isn't going to get good enough to win 3 straight. I just don't think it's going to happen. And you'll have, I mean, Donovan Mitchell clearly has the gene. We talk about Luka and the gene. Donovan Mitchell has that same gene. Mike Conley has been very good since he returned. He's got the dad powers since he returned. I mean, in his 2 games, how about this? In his 2 games, 26.5 points average. He's got 27 in the first game, 26 in the second game. 9 of 13 game 1, 8 of 13 game 2. Games 3 and 4, but his game 1 and game 2. Games 3 and 4. 7 of 8 from the 3-point line and 4 of 8 from the 3-point line. 0 turnovers and 8 assists over the 2 games. Listen, the Nuggets don't have a chance if Mike Conley is going to play like that. Because they were already, I mean, with just Donovan Mitchell, they weren't playing good enough defense to win basketball games. But when you got Mike Conley putting even more pressure on you, Jordan Clarkson has been absolutely phenomenal off the bench for them since he joined Utah. He's been good since he got there, but in the playoffs in particular, he's been great as well. I never thought this was going to be the case, but I don't see any situation in which Denver wins this series now, because clearly they can't stop him, and it doesn't take a whole lot. I mean, Jokic and Murray combined for 80 yesterday. 79. But they got pretty much nothing else from anybody else. Paul Millsap's had 16. That's about it. So clearly they don't. The formula they have in Denver right now is just not good enough for the playoffs. They got to play better defense, and they need more consistent scoring from their peripherals. Because getting 80 points from your top 2 guys should always be enough to win basketball games. Always be enough. And it wasn't. They lost 129-127. Great game, though, by the way. Really great game. But Utah, has a stranglehold on that series now, and it's looking very, very unlikely that Denver will move on to the second round. But we're going to talk a little bit more NBA. We'll talk about the other things that happened over the weekend as well, just sports in general from over the weekend. There's a lot that went on, a lot to get to, but we'll do that next on the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Monday. Thank you so much for joining us. 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/the JMULL Show, wherever you might be. Thank you for joining us on a Monday, whether you're watching live or listening to the podcast or watching the video at a later time. Thank you so much for making 110 Sports part of your day in some way, shape, or form. Listen, I want to complain for a minute. I was pretty excited about yesterday. You had the Champions League final. You had the final round of a PGA Tour playoff event. And you had the Indy 500. A concoction of games that a concoction of sporting events that has never happened. And if you're trying to find any sort of positive when it comes to what COVID-19 has forced, which is not really a smart thing to do, but it brings a very interesting pot of sports happening at the same time. You never get NBA and NFL at the same time, and you're going to get it. You never get the NBA backed up against FedEx Cup playoff events. You're going to get it. And you never get the Indy 500 in the middle of August, but you got it. And that's kind of, if nothing else, adds a little novelty and just an experience that you don't typically get in August. Quite frankly, the beginning of August is usually a pretty, sort of between, because baseball is just kind of getting stale. Everyone is waiting for the playoffs in a normal year because we've played 140, 120 baseball games at that point, 110, and you're still got 50 games left, and it's just, okay, let's go play playoff baseball, please. You don't have any football yet, and so it's just kind of a stale time for sports, and right now you've got a ton happening. We just talked about the NBA for 25 minutes in August. That didn't happen a whole lot, so that's kind of cool. And so what you end up having yesterday is you had the biggest spectacle in racing, the second biggest soccer game in the world behind the World Cup final. You had a FedEx Cup playoff event, and you had playoff basketball. Playoff basketball was great. The Champions League final was... I'm not a huge soccer person, so I can't sit here and speak about how just blown away I was by the soccer that was played and the tug and war of two different teams and Bayern being the best team in Europe right now, one of the best clubs in the world, if not the best club in the world. I can't speak to that a whole lot. But it was a close match. You only got one goal, and it came in the 59th minute. Bayern Munich is unbeaten in like 30 games. They're like, and 29 of those are wins. There's only one draw. Absolutely ridiculous. And if you want to get a true breakdown of the Champions League final, watch the Touchline Talk with Josh Doring tomorrow. That's definitely the play. If you're looking for a more in-depth soccer breakdown of what happened yesterday. But I was entertained by the second half of that game. The goal was beautiful. Little chip shot to the other side of the box and a header into the back of the net. It was beautiful. It really was, and it was set up very, very nicely. But everything else was kind of a letdown. Let me learn you some stuff real quick. First of all, the cut line at the Northern Trust, a playoff event, was -3. You could have played under par golf and still not made the cut. Everybody, except 3 guys who had poor weekends. I mean, Patrick Rogers went 76-77. Matt Jones went 76-71, and Richie Rowinski went 75-74 to end the tournament. So they finished over par, but everybody after that, you had 67 players finish under par. You had a 59, and then almost another 59 on the same day. Dustin Johnson was 11 under through 14. 12 under being the magic numbers, par 71 over at TPC Boston. You almost had 2 59s. You know what makes 59s less exciting? When you have 2 of them in the same day. That's why they're so spectacular, is because nobody ever gets them. It doesn't take very long to rattle off the names that have sub 60 rounds on the PGA Tour. And that's really awesome. And in the moment, it's like, wow, this is awesome. You're about to have 2 59s in a good day. And the other part of me is like, why is this golf course getting a chance to be a PGA Tour playoff event? If it's so easy that Dustin Johnson's going to shoot 30 under par, there's going to be 38 players at 10 under par or better, and Dustin Johnson's going to win by 11. That's so incredibly boring. And Josh Doring and I have had this conversation before. He's very much for the carnage, the chaos that comes with the U.S. Open when somebody wins at 1 under, 2 under par. And I'm totally for, and I'm sort of in the middle between 30 under and that 1 or 2 under. Give me 6 guys, 7 guys, kind of like at the PGA, that are right there around 12, 13 under. And they're all fighting, and you're going to have to make birdies to win. There's nothing more boring than somebody like struggling with bogey golf down the stretch and still winning the U.S. Open. That's not nearly as fun. What's fun is when Colin Morikawa hits a driver from 294 to 7 feet and makes an eagle on the 16th hole of the PGA Championship. That's entertaining. But Dustin Johnson's worst round of the week was 67. His next worst round was 64. He shot 63 on Sunday. Won by 11. The tournament was over before he got to the back nine. He could have made 10 more bogeys. He could have dropped 10 shots and still won the tournament. You know, last summer I was interning with the Indiana Golf Office, and a kid was up by 10 strokes or something like that on the last hole and made, it wasn't that many strokes, but he made like a 10 on the par 4 18th at Rock Hollow in Peru, Indiana, and still won the tournament because he was winning by so much. Like, multiply that by 2, and you still get a winner in Dustin Johnson if he had just blown up on the last hole. Which he didn't. It's a reachable par 5. I'm sure he birdied it. He did. That's just so boring. But it wasn't the most frustrating thing of the weekend. The most frustrating thing of the weekend, far and away. And I don't know, I need to reach out to some of my racing fans to see how they feel about this, because it drives me absolutely insane. The fact that you're allowed to win a race under caution is the dumbest rule in sports. And there are a lot of dumb rules in sports. And it might be the dumbest. Like, it actually might be the dumbest. There are a lot of dumb things in sports. Whether it's review, whether it's VAR, whether it's whatever you want to put in that spot. The fact that would be like, let's parallel it. Because essentially that just means that you're just giving into the delay. Whatever happened to make it, and first of all, it's really, if you saw the wreck, if you were watching the end of the Indy 500 yesterday and you saw that wreck, really glad that somebody, that racer walked away from it. I don't think he actually walked away, but he was alert after the crash because it was bad. He lost control coming out of the last turn. I think it was turn 4, and went right into the barricade that goes into pit row. Just slammed it 100 miles an hour. It was, oh man. It made my heart skip a beat. It was bad. But it looked like he was okay. He was giving like the signals to the crash response team that he was okay, that he was doing, lifting up his visor, like making a little wave. So I think he was okay. But that was with like 7 laps to go. And it was a pretty big crash, so they had a lot of cleaning up to do. But it wasn't the caution that basically they had to stop the race because there was so much debris. So what happened is that you got an Indy 500 winner under caution. They just sort of lollygagged through the last 6 laps under caution, and he won the race. The biggest Indy 500 race, the biggest IndyCar race of the year, and arguably the biggest racing event in this country, period, NASCAR or otherwise. At least from a spectator perspective, it absolutely is. But to let that kind of thing end under caution just seems criminal. And maybe I'm going to reach out to somebody and I'm going to ask, and maybe they'll give me a reason that changes my mind. But that would be like stopping the Masters with the leaders on 16 because of a rain delay. And deciding that because the rain delay is going to last as long as it would take those players to finish the last 3 holes, saying, okay, that's it. We're giving whoever's winning now the green jacket. That's so silly. Can you imagine? It drives me crazy, and it shouldn't drive me crazy because it's whatever. It's the way that racing is. But the fact that you can, like, if I, like, me as a winner, I'd feel almost weird about it. It's like, wait, I just get to, like, win now? It was pretty funny. They were talking about, okay, now you got to coach Soto through the last 3 laps of the caution. Make sure you don't, like, hit a wall on accident. You know, it's making me laugh that, like, you know, of course that is a thing. If you crash, then you lose your spot, and the guy behind you gets to win the race. That's just funny to me, but it just can't be that hard to let them go around in circles at a relatively slow pace, so that, because, you know, there's the conversation about, like, you know, the pit crews have calculated their tire wear and tear. They've set it out to go 250 laps or 200, or however long the Indy 500, however long IMS's track is. But you've set things up to go that many laps. And if you have to go more laps, then the formula, so to speak, is off. And so I can appreciate that, and I can understand that. But there's got to be a way to just make it so marginal that you can stop the race for a second, even if the cars are still moving around the track. I don't know. I'd be curious to hear how real racing fans feel about it, because it was just driving me crazy. Driving me absolutely crazy that was the way that it ended. And I guess it was a perfect way for a race and for the Indy 500 in 2020 to end. Right? I mean, it was probably the perfect way. You didn't have fans. And then the race just ends with everybody driving a very responsible speed around Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and that's boring. I'm not watching to watch somebody drive a responsible speed around that racetrack. And it so rubbed me the wrong way, and it probably shouldn't have, and I'm probably overreacting just a little bit, but I don't really care, because it was driving me crazy, and I was a little put off by that. But anyways, it was a good weekend in the sports world, and one of the, you know, it was a busy weekend in sports, and we haven't gotten a lot of those recently, for obvious reasons. But we'll come back with FYI here on the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Monday. Wrapping up the show here with some FYI. But first, before we get to that, I want to get to the Sixers real quick. We forgot to talk about them at the beginning of the show. But listen, how the product that the Sixers put on the floor this season, it won't ever look quite like that again. Brett Brown is gone. Now, and you know, I feel bad for Brett Brown. I really do, because Brett Brown is an average coach in a situation that required a much better than average coach. The list of coaches that could have gone into Philly and juggled what was going on there and trying to figure out how to put together 2 guys in Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid who play literally opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to the type of basketball they play. Joel Embiid is out of shape, likes to play slow basketball, methodical, is great in the half court, back to the basket is very good, pick and pop, pick and roll, all of that. That's where Joel Embiid is his best. Ben Simmons is at his best on the opposite end of the spectrum. Put 4 shooters around him, run up and down the floor, get rebounds, go, 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 go. Shoot a ton of threes. That's where Ben Simmons would be the best. Not him shooting the threes, but put 4 shooters around him, let him just go, 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 pick and rolls. He can get to the basket. He's very, very good with, going downhill. He's a phenomenal passer. Trying to figure out how to play both of those guys together and get the most out of them would be a very tall task for anybody. And Brett Brown wasn't the guy to make that happen. But I think that's a very tall ask for anybody, and Brett Brown's not a horrible coach. He's just not a great one. And he's not one who's always going to get the most out of his players. And he needed to get the most out of his players and find a way to get the most out of his players all at the same time. And he just wasn't able to do that, and now he's probably gone. I would be shocked if he isn't. But the Celtics finished off the Sixers, and in very Sixers fashion, they managed to be the first team to be eliminated from the NBA playoffs. Which is just so appropriate for the Sixers. I mean, the Nets were eliminated later that day, but they were the first team to be eliminated from the NBA playoffs. Doris Burke was just hammer nail coffin to the Sixers at the very end of that in the play-by-play. But it was a close game too. It's just in very true fashion. I mean, Embiid was good again, 30 and 10. Nobody else really was. You got a little bit more from everybody else in the starting lineup, which is why it was close, but it still wasn't all that spectacular in any way other than Embiid. You got 32 from Kemba Walker. Tatum got 28. You got 16 from Jaylen Brown. You need more from their bench, but that'll come, I think. And it'll be, at least I hope it will. There's a lot of, there's not any that guy can get you some points off the bench kind of players. But we'll see if somebody can step up, and more important, that Raptors-Celtics series is going to be incredible. I'm so pumped for that one. So pumped for that one. But, there's going to be big changes in Philly. Does Embiid ask for a trade? What kind, how far do we actually go here? Do you blow it up as just another disappointing season? Is that just the end and you got to do something just to change the way that the fans are looking at your team? Because if I was a Philly fan, I've officially given up on the Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid core. First of all, you traded away Jimmy Butler, which was the guy that I wouldn't have traded away. Jimmy Butler's about to go to the second round of the playoffs, and the Sixers aren't. The Sixers weren't really contending for titles and weren't getting all that close before Jimmy Butler got there. They did when he was. That was a very appropriate fashion. It's sort of like, the Phillies just trying to hold on to what they have, and it's just wasn't enough. And that's just kind of how you feel about Philly in this era of Sixers basketball. It's just not quite enough. The question now is just how much of a change will there be? That's the biggest question now. Just how much of a change will there be? There's going to be a new coach. What else happens alongside of that? And everything that Philly does just doesn't, it goes against what works in the NBA. They don't play fast enough. They don't shoot enough threes. They don't have great guard play. Ben Simmons is great, but Shake Milton, what? And I've talked about that on this show before. But Shake Milton, come on. You're not winning nothing with Shake Milton as your point guard. That's a flaw. It just is. The NFL had COVID-19 testing setback after several false positives were identified. That's not good. We got to be able to trust tests. That's the only way that sports are actually going to work, is if we trust tests. And if we're not going to be able to, from a specific New Jersey lab, you can't, if you're not going to be able to trust the results that you get, this isn't going to work. So the league will investigate. We'll see what actual results we get. But the Bears had 9 positive results, and all 9 were confirmed as false positives. That can't happen. That can't happen if this is going to work, especially in a sport like football where everyone is so close together. You have to be able to trust the information that you're getting. And over the weekend, the NFL couldn't trust the results that they were getting, and that's not good for anybody. Yesterday would have been Kobe Bryant's 42nd birthday. Mamba forever. You know, I was not a Kobe Bryant fan growing up. I was never a Kobe Bryant fan. But with that being said, have the utmost respect for what he did in LA, the person he was, who he was in his daughter's life, who he was outside of after basketball was over for him, and what he did as an NBA player I have the utmost respect for that, and of course it's absolutely tragic that he died when he did in the fashion that he did. So happy birthday to Kobe, and rest in peace to him. Yesterday would have been his 42nd birthday. And then finally, Touchline Talk with Josh Doring and Around the Bases with Chris Brown come back tomorrow. I'm sure Josh will break down everything that happened in the Champions League final. And we've started MLS in home buildings again, so I'm sure he'll break some of that down as well. Chris Brown, baseball continues to chug on. I think I'm going to try to chat with him on the show on Wednesday. Baseball seems to have figured something out, you know? I mean, we've played 30 games. Tampa Bay is 19-10. We got, Oakland 20-9. We got 29 games. Lots of teams have played 29 games. We're halfway through the season. And things have seemed to straighten out. So that's good. That's great for baseball, and there hasn't been too terribly much going wrong since what happened at the very beginning. But so baseball continues to move along. So Around the Bases will also continue to move along. But that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining us on the JMULL Show over at 110sportsmedia.com. If you haven't checked out the new content on the site today, please do. We got a lot of stuff up on the site then, as we do every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. But if you haven't checked that out, please do. You can check out that podcast, the Jays for Days podcast. We have a new podcast with Kelsey Casper on the Bonfire. Kelsey is out in Nebraska as a sports anchor in Lincoln. And that's a very, very interesting place to be right now with how Nebraska has responded to the Big Ten not playing fall sports. So we broke all that down with her, and it was a great interview. If you haven't checked that out, you should check that out as well. But I'll be back here same time, 11 a.m. Eastern on Wednesday. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you then.